I'm Kelly Cooper, 32, and I turned a basement invention into a multi-million-dollar military contract. For years, I lived under my parents' roof, paid rent, kept quiet, and poured everything into building something they didn't believe in. But when they laughed at my work in front of the whole family, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been dismissed or mocked by the people closest to you? If that hit home, drop your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to prove yourself after being underestimated, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about standing your ground and rewriting the narrative. What happened next caught everyone off guard. I grew up in a house where respect was earned by clocking in, coming home tired, and complaining about your boss over dinner. My dad ran a small contracting business, mostly drywall and minor renovations. My mom worked admin at the local elementary school, the same one my siblings and I went to. Everything in our home revolved around what could be measured in hours worked and dollars brought in. If you weren't earning a paycheck, you were a burden. That was the unspoken rule, and it applied early. I wasn't like the rest of them. While my brothers were out learning how to swing a hammer or trying to convince my dad to let them tag along to job sites, I was in the garage, sitting cross-legged with an old walkie-talkie cracked open in front of me. I didn't care about drywall or landscaping. I cared about signal strength, circuitry, and how long it would take me to build something better than what came in the box. At 10, I was soldering wires from my dad's scrap bucket and experimenting with antenna placement. By 12, I had figured out how to extend a basic radio's range by 1.5 miles using nothing but kitchen foil and a repurposed umbrella. Nobody clapped. My dad told me to clean up the mess. My mom said I'd be better off learning to type fast. You'll need that if you ever want a real office job. I didn't argue. I never did. I just kept working. Quietly. In school, I wasn't a problem. I wasn't social either. I had one friend, David, who shared my obsession with engineering forums and military hardware patents. We'd text back and forth at night about new defense prototypes or reverse engineer YouTube teardown videos. Everyone else thought we were weird. I didn't care. What we were doing made sense. It had logic, structure, and consequences, unlike family dinner where my dad talked about kids these days while pointedly avoiding looking at me. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't out partying or skipping classes. I graduated top of my class in physics and math, won second place at the regional robotics competition, and got into a decent state college for mechanical engineering. No scholarships, I applied too late, but I worked all summer, saved enough for the first semester, and figured I'd sort out the rest as I went. My parents didn't offer to help. College is optional, my dad said when I brought it up. If you're going, you better make it worth it. The funny part is I did make it worth it. I worked 2 jobs while finishing my degree, overnights at a distribution center and weekend shifts doing basic IT repair for the university. I didn't party, didn't date, didn't go to a single football game. I graduated debt-free and immediately started applying for R&D positions. Dozens of applications. Few responses. The ones I did get back all said the same thing, not enough experience. Entry level, but they still wanted 3 years minimum in the field. It was a dead end before it even began. So I came home. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have a choice. By then, my parents had downsized to a smaller house on the edge of town. My youngest brother had already moved in with his girlfriend, and my old room had become a laundry staging area. They offered me the basement, half-finished and full of storage bins. I said yes. I set up a makeshift workbench in the corner, cleared out enough space to sleep and prototype. I told myself it was temporary. Just until I got a foothold. I picked up a night job at a supply warehouse. 10-hour shifts, 4 days a week. I'd come home, sleep for a few hours, then tinker. Sometimes I'd work straight through the night and forget to eat. I was building something. I just didn't know what it was yet. At first, my parents said nothing. Maybe they thought it was a phase. Then came the comments. You know, there's a contractor down the street hiring. That's something real. I don't know why you waste your time with those little gadgets. Are you even trying to get a real job or just hiding down there? I didn't respond. I just kept working. What I was building started with a concept I'd sketched out in college, a wearable guidance system for infantry, something lightweight, intuitive, and customizable. I didn't have a name for it yet, but I'd already filed a provisional patent, paid for with my warehouse paycheck. The early version was clunky, too many exposed wires, and a battery pack that overheated. But by the third prototype, I had something functional. I built it with off-the-shelf components and custom software I taught myself how to write. It was ugly, but it worked. Still, to my family, I was the adult child living in the basement. The failure with an expensive degree and no job title. My brothers barely talked to me anymore. One of them got a job in HVAC, bought a new truck, and moved 3 hours away. The other joined the military, Air Force, came home on leave twice a year, and acted like I was invisible. My dad started introducing me to people as the smart one who's still figuring things out, always with a little smile, like it was funny. My mom just said I was creative and changed the subject. There were days I thought about quitting. Days I came home from a 10-hour shift on my feet, knuckles bruised, covered in dust, and saw my prototype sitting exactly where I left it, untouched, unsellable, and unproven. I had no investors, no advisors, no connections in defense tech. Just this thing I believed in and no one else did. The ridicule was subtle but relentless. One Thanksgiving, my uncle asked if I was still playing with toys. At Christmas, my dad told a story about how he used to take apart radios too, until I got a real job and stopped pretending I was going to invent the next laser beam. Even my mom laughed at that one. I paid rent on time every month. I helped around the house. I fixed the garbage disposal, replaced the broken door hinge, and handled the taxes when my mom got overwhelmed. I didn't ask for anything. But no matter what I did, I was always the one living in the basement. They saw failure. I saw runway. While they were counting hours, I was counting revisions. While they were tracking pay stubs, I was tracking specs. I knew I was getting closer. Each version of the prototype improved on the last. I integrated real-time feedback, modular add-ons, biometric monitoring. I started documenting everything, technical manuals, performance tests, data logs, just in case I ever got the chance to show it to someone who mattered. They never asked to see it. Never once. For years went by. My friends stopped calling. My name faded from their group chats. I missed weddings, holidays, and baby showers, partly from exhaustion, partly because I couldn't afford the travel, but mostly because I didn't want to sit across from someone who would ask, "So, what are you doing now?" I didn't have an answer that fit on a LinkedIn profile. But I had something better. A working system. Field tested. Patent pending. Ready for someone, anyone, with vision and capital. I didn't tell my parents when I booked the meeting with the defense tech firm. I didn't tell them when I submitted the full patent. I didn't tell them when the prototype passed the final testing benchmarks. I kept my head down and kept working. They didn't see what I was building. They saw what I lacked. I let them. Because I knew the day would come when I wouldn't have to explain it anymore. I'd just show them. At first, I told myself it was in my head. That it wasn't intentional when they left me out of things or changed the group chat name without telling me. That maybe it had nothing to do with what I was or wasn't doing. But over time, the pattern became hard to ignore. My brothers got married within a year of each other. I didn't find out about either proposal until weeks after they happened. My older brother invited me to his wedding through a forwarded email chain that still had the catering quote attached. "Just wanted to make sure you got this," he'd added. I was seated at the far end of the reception hall, next to a second cousin and someone's coworker. Nobody mentioned my name in any toasts. Nobody asked what I'd been working on. It was always like that. The invisible sibling. The placeholder. The one they called only when someone's laptop wasn't working or the TV remote needed reprogramming. I stopped getting invited to birthdays. At first, my mom made excuses, small gathering, limited seating, last minute, but even those stopped coming. I'd hear about them later, see the photos on my cousin's social media. Everyone smiling around a cake. Everyone there but me. Whenever I did show up for the rare family function, I was easy to spot. Not because I stood out, but because I didn't belong. Everyone else looked like they had something to show for themselves. New job. New baby. New mortgage. I showed up with calloused hands, burn marks on my sleeves, and the smell of solder in my hair. One Christmas Eve, I walked into the living room carrying a plate of deviled eggs, and my uncle barked out, "There she is. The mad scientist. Still living underground, right? Found any aliens yet?" Everyone laughed. I smiled tightly, set the plate down, and didn't say a word. My dad didn't say anything either. Just went back to his beer and his recliner. If it bothered him, he didn't show it. At some point, they stopped asking what I was working on. Not because they forgot, but because they didn't care. Or maybe they were tired of pretending to. Either way, it was easier to act like I wasn't doing anything than to try and understand something that didn't fit into their world. "You know," my mom said once, while folding laundry next to me in the kitchen, "you could be doing something real with your life. You're so smart. You could teach. Or work in an office. You don't have to stay down there building toys forever." I didn't respond. I just picked up my coffee and walked back to the basement. They called it a lab like it was a joke. They had no idea what went on down there. At that point, the system was already functional. I'd completed 4 separate prototype versions, each one improving on the last. I'd built a custom interface for rapid adjustments, modular attachments for different roles, combat medic, scout, comms, and run bench tests on battery life, terrain mapping, and responsiveness under strain. The software had over 3,000 lines of code, all mine. The design met all non-lethal deployment specs. I had logs, data points, timestamps. It was real. It worked. But none of that mattered to them. Then came Derek. Derek was my younger cousin. His parents lived 2 hours away, but he spent summers visiting when we were kids. Back then, he used to follow me around like a shadow, asking how wires worked and if I could show him how to build a flashlight from scratch. He lost interest around the time he discovered high school parties and weed. After that, he barely said 2 words to me. Apparently, sometime during my 4th year living at home, Derek landed a job at a defense contractor. Entry-level systems analysis for a subcontractor that supplied parts to a larger firm. The kind of position you get with a decent GPA, a polished LinkedIn, and a clean haircut. My family reacted like he'd been appointed Secretary of Defense. There was a dinner. Not for me. For Derek. My aunt drove in with him for the weekend. My mom planned the whole thing, pot roast, lemon pie, the works. She even dug out the good tablecloth and had me help set the table. I remember thinking, maybe it's just a dinner. Maybe they're just proud of him. That's fine. Let them be proud. Then my dad poured Derek a drink, whiskey from his hidden stash, the good stuff he usually only brought out on holidays, and raised a toast. "To Derek," he said. Finally someone doing something real with all that schooling. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Nobody even looked in my direction. Derek went on about the projects he'd been assigned, most of which he couldn't really talk about. "Confidential," he kept saying, with a smile like he was in on something important. Everyone ate it up. My mom asked if he'd met any generals yet. My dad asked how much longer before he started designing missiles. Derek laughed and said, "I'm just a junior analyst, but who knows?" One day, that night, I went back down to the basement and worked until sunrise. I wasn't jealous. That's not what it was. I didn't want his job. I didn't want his title. I just wanted a sliver of the respect they gave him, without even asking what he actually did. Without knowing if he was any good at it. Meanwhile, I had built something from nothing. No mentor. No seed funding. No blueprint. Just sweat, sleep deprivation, and stubbornness. I had something that could change the way small units operated in unfamiliar terrain. Something that could save lives. But I was still the one who got asked to take out the trash. And the more I succeeded, quietly, incrementally, the more I disappeared. When I filed my second provisional patent, I didn't tell anyone. I knew what the reaction would be. A shrug at best. A joke at worst. When a former professor from my undergrad program responded to one of my cold emails and agreed to review my concept notes, I didn't mention it over dinner. I just said I was working overtime at the warehouse. Easier that way. When I finally got the field test approval for my prototype through a volunteer military tech lab program, a pilot initiative I'd applied to 6 times before, they didn't even know. I said I had errands to run and drove 3 hours to meet with the lab coordinator in person. The tests came back positive. Not flawless, but promising. The feedback was clear. With funding and polish, this had serious potential. The data report sat on my nightstand for a week before I printed a clean copy and stored it in a plastic file in the bottom drawer of my desk. It should have been a turning point. A moment to share. A reason to finally explain why I'd spent the last 4 years chasing something nobody else could see. But I didn't tell them. Because by then, I already knew. The more I built, the harder they held on to their version of who I was. Not because they didn't love me, but because changing that story meant admitting they'd been wrong. That they hadn't believed in something worth believing in. So they ignored the signs. Laughed at the burns on my sleeves. Looked past the glint of steel peeking out from my satchel. Never asked why I was ordering bulk microcontrollers or why I suddenly needed to know how to write grant proposals. They didn't want to know. I let them have their version. Because I had mine. And mine was getting closer every day. It had been months since anyone in my family had invited me to anything. I wasn't surprised anymore when birthdays passed without a text or when group photos popped up online without me in them. Still, when the invite for a family barbecue came through, I paused. It was my mom who called. She said they were hosting at the house, burgers, beer, the usual. Derek would be there. My brothers too. She made it sound casual, like it hadn't been a deliberate exclusion for almost a year. I hesitated. I almost said no. But some part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be part of something, wanted to believe maybe things had shifted. Maybe they'd seen the article I published in the niche tech forum. Maybe they knew about the field test approvals. Maybe they were ready to listen. I brought a 3D printed scale model of the latest prototype in my backpack. It was clean, tight, minimal. I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting it, not for the military contractor I was hoping to pitch, not for a magazine feature, just for this. I thought maybe if my dad saw it in person, if he held it in his hands, he'd understand this wasn't some fantasy. That I'd built something real. That it mattered. I got there early. My mom gave me a quick hug at the door and told me to put the potato salad in the fridge. I could hear laughter coming from the backyard, gravelly voices, the sharp clang of tongs on a grill, beer bottles cracking open. The kind of noise that used to make me feel like I belonged. I stepped out back. Nobody looked up right away. Derek was holding court by the grill, explaining something to my older brother about weapon systems. I caught the tail end. Something about data cross-matching and the targeting arrays. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't right either. I knew because I'd spent the last 6 months deep in R&D papers that explained it in actual terms, not buzzwords. Hey, I said, offering a half smile. It's been a while. My brother nodded. You're still living at home? Still working, I said, like those things were the same. The conversation ended there. I found a spot by the patio table and waited. It was a hot day. Sweat beaded at my temples. I didn't take the model out right away. I wanted the right moment. We ate in patches, people grabbing plates as burgers came off the grill, standing around in little clusters. My mom made a round of introductions for one of my cousin's friends, listing everyone's jobs like a resume. When she got to me, she said, "And this is our daughter. She's working on some kind of engineering thing, right, honey?" I said yes. That was it. Later, after the plates were mostly cleared and the conversation had softened into idle chat, I unzipped my backpack and pulled out the model. It was small, just big enough to demonstrate the interface layout and structure. I'd color-coded the modules, labeled each port, added a touch-sensitive pad to show how the mapping system worked. It wasn't meant to impress anyone outside of a design lab, but for a backyard, it was more than enough. "Hey, Dad," I said, walking over. "I wanted to show you something I've been working on. It's based on a modular HUD concept for ground units." I integrated. He looked up from his beer, sighed, and waved me off. "Still with the toys, huh?" My mouth stayed open a second too long. I closed it, lowered the model slightly. My mom chuckled from across the yard. She used to take apart the toaster when she was 5. We could never keep anything plugged in. Someone, my uncle, I think, snorted. Should have been a boy. At least then the weird tools would have made more sense. Then Derek spoke, biting into a corn cob. "You know she applied for a patent?" like DARPA's just waiting for her to call. The laughter was sharp and immediate. It wasn't cruel in the overt sense, but it hit harder than if it had been. Because it was casual, easy, comfortable. They'd been laughing at me for years, and I just never heard it this clearly before. I looked at my dad. I waited. He didn't say anything. He didn't tell them to knock it off. He didn't ask to see the model. He didn't even look at it. He turned to my brother and asked how the baby was sleeping through the night. The conversation moved on without me. I stood there holding the prototype in my hands, 2 years of design, revisions, testing, and for the first time, I felt ashamed of it. Not because it wasn't good, but because I had brought it here. To them. Expecting something they'd never been capable of giving. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for dessert. I walked back through the house, put the model back in my bag, and left. No one followed me. When I got home, I sat in the basement for over an hour with the lights off. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I just sat there, staring at the desk where all the prototypes lived. The soldering tools, the scope, the bins of wires. I could still smell plastic and melted resin. I could still hear the laughter. There was a moment, just a flicker, where I thought about giving it all up. Selling the equipment. Deleting the code. Finding something real, like they said. A job where I could explain what I did at dinner parties and no one would smirk. But it passed. Because the problem wasn't me. It never had been. It was that they only knew how to respect what they could see. Salaries, promotions, titles. Clean fingernails and buttoned-up answers. And I didn't live in that world. I lived in schematics and prototype logs and sleepless nights that sometimes led to breakthroughs. I lived in risks. In possibilities. In potential. They couldn't see it, so they called it nothing. That night, I sent one email. Just one. To a contact I'd been sitting on for months, an engineer I met through an obscure military tech forum. He'd mentioned he was looking for collaborators on a new human interface guidance platform. I attached a spec sheet, a prototype demo video, and a short write-up on the integration layers I'd developed. I hit send before I could overthink it. Then I went back to work. After the barbecue, I didn't hear from anyone for weeks. Not a single message. No follow-up. No, good to see you. No one even asked if I got home okay. I stayed quiet. Let them take the lead if they wanted to. They didn't. At first, I told myself they were busy. That it didn't mean anything. But the truth was clearer than I wanted to admit. That night had made something permanent. I wasn't angry, not exactly. But something had settled. Something final. I stopped checking the family group chat. I stopped wondering if I should show up to things uninvited just to prove I still existed. The silence that came after wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was effortless. So I put my head down and worked. The email I'd sent that night got a response the next morning. Short. Polite. Curious. He said he liked the direction of the modular interface. Asked if I had any full documentation. I sent everything I had, prototypes, test footage, field notes, the data logs from the volunteer lab program that had approved the platform 6 months earlier. I didn't hold anything back. 2 days later, he introduced me to someone higher up. She was part of a military-affiliated R&D firm that specialized in non-lethal combat support systems. They'd been struggling with real-time visual mapping for infantry in low-visibility terrain. My prototype, apparently, solved 3 of the major bottlenecks they'd been stuck on for over a year. I hadn't expected that. The first video call was just technical review. They asked questions. I answered. I kept it professional. No emotion, no pitch. Just facts. I told them exactly what I'd built, how I'd built it, and what it could do. They didn't laugh. They didn't condescend. They asked smart follow-up questions and took notes. By the end of the call, they asked if I could come in for an in-person demonstration. That was when it hit me. This was real. My old college professor, Dr. Ames, was the one who'd helped make the introduction in the first place. He'd been a quiet supporter since I graduated, the kind of mentor who didn't need recognition. He'd read every paper I'd sent him, given notes, connected me to people when he could. He was the only person who knew what I'd really been doing in that basement. He called me the night before the demo. Said to take it seriously. They're not just being polite. They're interested. I didn't sleep. I went over every detail. Reassembled the prototype from scratch. Retested every connection. Practiced the walkthrough a dozen times. Not for them, for me. I needed to be ready. I needed this to work. The meeting took place in a low-rise building on the edge of a defense campus an hour outside the city. The room was plain, concrete floors, folding chairs, one long table with a monitor. But the people in it weren't. There were 3 of them, all former field engineers turned project leads. They'd seen enough failed ideas to know what wouldn't scale. I showed them the prototype. Walked through the interface, the live feedback, the modular adjustments. Ran the data off a dummy scenario I'd coded to simulate a forested combat zone with no GPS lock. They watched. They asked questions. They didn't say much at first. Then one of them said, "Where the hell have you been hiding?" It wasn't a joke. It wasn't sarcastic. It was genuine. "We've had 3 separate design teams trying to solve this," another added. And none of them got this far. I didn't know what to say. They asked if I'd consider licensing the design for further development under their umbrella. Nothing binding, just a letter of intent and a possible funding partnership. I didn't answer right away. I asked for time. They agreed. I drove home in silence. No music. No calls. Just the road. When I got back, I sat in the basement for a long time. Same chair. Same desk. Same lamp with the busted hinge that flickered if I nudged it wrong. Nothing about the space had changed. But everything else had. I looked around at the tools. The folders. The walls I'd soundproofed with old blankets to keep the grinding noise from bothering anyone upstairs, like they would have noticed. I remembered every night I'd spent there, piecing things together with no guarantee it would lead anywhere. Every time I'd told myself to keep going, even when it felt like I was building something only I would ever see. And now they wanted it. Not for charity. Not because they felt bad for the weird girl in the basement. But because it worked. Because it solved a real problem. Because I had done something that mattered. I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way I thought I might. I felt released. For the first time, I realized I didn't need their permission to keep going. I didn't need their approval to believe in what I'd built. I had proven the only thing I ever needed to prove, that my time down here wasn't wasted. I didn't feel the urge to call my dad. I didn't fantasize about marching upstairs with the offer letter or dropping the demo video in the family group chat. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that I wasn't waiting to be seen. I'd stopped asking them to notice. And in that quiet, with the basement humming around me, I finally understood what freedom felt like. Not revenge. Not validation. Just freedom. They'd never see it coming. Because they never looked. Finalizing the patent felt quieter than I expected. After years of prototyping, revisions, testing, failed outreach, and late-night drafting, it arrived in the mail like any other document. A plain white envelope. My name in the corner. The official seal tucked into the bottom left. I sat with it for a full minute before opening it. The confirmation letter inside was short, barely half a page. No congratulatory language. No ceremony. Just a number, a date, and a signature. But I knew what it meant. The following weeks moved fast. Faster than I thought they would. The military signed on through the R&D group that had first seen my demo. They didn't buy it outright. They signed a development agreement with full rights to deploy in specialized units and test under live conditions. That alone would have been enough to change everything. But then the second offer came. A private tech firm based out of Virginia, small, agile, well-funded. They didn't want the military version. They wanted the civilian one. The adaptability framework. They saw commercial potential in remote fieldwork, disaster response, wilderness SR. They offered to license the rights for all non-military applications. I had a lawyer look over the terms twice. Dr. Ames referred me to someone he trusted. It was airtight. Fair. Generous. The check came in a manila envelope, standard mail. Not even tracked. There were no announcements. No press releases. Just a number printed on a piece of paper that made my hands tremble. 8 figures. Before taxes. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I had never imagined what that many zeros would look like with my name above them. I didn't post about it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even tell anyone right away. I just sat at the basement desk where it all started. Same chair. Same flickering lamp. Same blue bin of spare wiring that I hadn't touched in months. And then I got up, walked upstairs, and asked my dad if he could come with me to the bank. He was in the garage, sorting screws into an old peanut butter jar. He looked up surprised. "You need another loan," he said, not unkindly, just flat, the way you say something you've said a dozen times before. I didn't answer. I just said, "Can you come?" He shrugged, wiped his hands on a rag, and grabbed his jacket. The bank was 15 minutes away. Neither of us said much on the drive. He asked once if my car was still acting up. I said I'd taken care of it. He nodded and went back to looking out the window. Inside, I waited for a teller with a folder in my hand. He stood beside me, one arm resting on the counter like we were back at the DMV. I caught a glimpse of us in the reflection of the glass partition, me in my old hoodie, him in his flannel jacket, both of us worn in different ways. When the teller called us up, I handed her the check without a word. She glanced down, typed something into her terminal, then stopped. Looked at it again. Looked at me. "Is this real?" she asked. I nodded. She turned the check over, scanned the barcode on the back, then read the amount out loud as she keyed it in. $10 million. The silence behind me stretched. I didn't turn around, but I could feel my dad freeze. He didn't say anything. Not at first. Just stood there, staring at the check. Like he didn't believe it. Like it couldn't possibly be connected to me. The teller cleared her throat. "We'll need to confirm the transfer through a manager. Do you have a preferred account for deposit?" I gave her the information, signed where she asked, and waited. Behind me, my dad finally spoke. Quietly. "You're not joking." I shook my head. He let out a long breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite shock. Just air, leaving his body in a way that sounded like something collapsing. "When did all this happen?" he asked. I didn't look at him. "A while ago." "Why didn't you tell us?" I could have said a lot of things. That they wouldn't have believed me. That they hadn't asked. That it wouldn't have mattered. But I just said, I didn't think it was something you'd be interested in. He didn't argue. When we got back in the car, he didn't drive off right away. He sat there with the keys in his hand and stared at the dashboard like it was giving him answers. "I always thought you were wasting your time," he said, finally. "Those little projects. The parts everywhere." I didn't get it. "I know. But you did it." I didn't say anything. He tapped the steering wheel twice with the side of his hand, like he was trying to restart a rhythm that wasn't coming back. "You did it," he said again, quieter this time. The ride home was silent. That night, I took the check stub and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, not for the amount, but for the date. It marked the end of something. The next morning, I got up early and made coffee in the quiet kitchen. My mom came downstairs in her robe, surprised to see me up. She looked at the cup in my hand like she wanted to ask something, but didn't. "You're up early," she said. "Had some errands." She nodded, then opened the fridge like nothing had changed. I didn't tell her about the check. I didn't offer an explanation. They'd had years to ask. I didn't owe them the ending to a story they never read. Later that week, I transferred funds into a new account, set up automatic withdrawals for a local scholarship fund I'd been following, and scheduled a meeting with an accountant to start the paperwork on a private foundation. Quiet things. No press. No branding. I still lived in the basement, but it felt different now. Like a time capsule. I started boxing up some of the older prototypes. Labeled each one. Filed the original sketches into sleeves. There was no parade. No applause. No headline. But I slept through the night for the first time in years. Not because I had money. Because I didn't need to be understood anymore. It didn't take long before the news found its way to the rest of the family. I never told them myself. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't post anything. But money, real money, has a way of leaking through cracks, especially in families like mine where success is usually measured by trucks, square footage, and who foots the bill at Applebee's. It started small. A text from my cousin Melanie. "Hey, is it true you made, like, $10 million off a robot or something?" I didn't answer. Then Derek texted. "Yo, congrats. Didn't realize your project was serious. If you ever need help expanding, I'm pretty good with systems integration. No pressure. Just putting it out there." He signed it with a thumbs up emoji. That was the first time he'd texted me in over 3 years. Then came the rest. My uncle called me out of the blue one afternoon, leaving a voicemail I didn't bother returning. "Just heard the big news. Always knew you were a smart cookie. Guess all those hours in the basement paid off, huh? Let's grab a drink sometime, catch up." The same uncle who once said I should have been a boy. The same one who laughed when my sister's husband mocked my patent like it was a coloring book submission. Suddenly, I was the quiet genius. The misunderstood prodigy. The black sheep who turned out to be holding the biggest card the whole time. No one asked what I had gone through to get there. No one mentioned the years they spent pretending I didn't exist. They just wanted proximity now that I had something they couldn't ignore. I didn't give them much. I stayed polite. Answered when necessary. Deflected when I could. One night, I found my dad standing in the garage, staring at the old metal shelf where I used to keep all the tools I borrowed. Some were still there. Others had migrated into my basement years ago and never made their way back. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to speak. Finally, he said, "You really did it, huh?" I nodded. He nodded too. Looked back at the shelf. "That old soldering iron still in one piece?" "It's retired," I said. He let out a soft laugh. Figures. He didn't apologize. He didn't say he was wrong. But the silence after that moment held something that hadn't been there before. Respect, maybe. Or humility. Or just the absence of dismissal. Whatever it was, I took it. A few weeks later, I moved out. I didn't buy anything flashy. No penthouse. No sports car. No massive estate on the edge of town. Just a modest 2-bedroom house with a clean garage, a small backyard, and enough natural light to work without overhead bulbs during the day. It had a finished basement, but I never used it for prototyping. I didn't need to. I'd already built the thing I came to build. I paid off my student loans in full, made a lump sum donation to a foundation that funds STEM scholarships for girls in underfunded high schools, set up recurring grants through my lawyer so it wouldn't be about one big gesture, but a steady investment in people like me, girls who were told their ideas were hobbies, not futures. Dr. Ames wrote me a letter when he heard about it. He didn't mention the money. He just said he was proud that I used my breakthrough the way I always said I would, to create access for people who couldn't get through the door on their own. I framed the letter, hung it in the hallway near my office. Most days, I kept my routine simple. I still woke up early. Still made coffee the same way. Still went for late-night walks when my head got too full. Some habits don't change just because your account balance does. The biggest shift wasn't what I had, it was what I no longer needed. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone sitting around a backyard grill with a plastic cup in their hand. I didn't need to replay that moment in the bank to anyone who wasn't there. And I didn't need to go back to that basement. The last time I saw it, the lights were off. The desk was still there. The wires coiled neatly in the bins. The notebook I used to scribble out systems diagrams still sat in the drawer, open to the last page I ever touched. I thought about taking it with me. Thought about locking the door behind me like it was a museum piece. But I left it. Not because I was angry. Because I didn't need it anymore. What I'd built was no longer just code and hardware. It was distance. Boundaries. A new frame for my life that didn't depend on whether anyone finally saw what had been in front of them the whole time. I didn't correct my uncle when he told people he always believed in me. I didn't tell my cousin she wasn't qualified to work on my team. I didn't remind Derek what he said that day at the barbecue. They had their version of the story. I had mine. And I was finally in a place where I didn't need to argue about which one was true. I knew. That was enough. And that knowledge, quiet, private, unshakable, was worth more than any applause they could have given me back then. The real transformation wasn't what they saw when the money came. It was what I let go of when I stopped waiting for them to see me at all. It was sometime in late spring when my mom called. I remember because I had just finished reviewing the final licensing documents for a secondary application of the tech, something related to remote terrain mapping for emergency medical response. I had the window open. The light was soft. The call came in as I was pouring coffee. She didn't leave a voicemail. Just a missed call with her name on it, the same as always. I waited a bit. Let it sit. Then called her back. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. Not warm, not cold, just neutral. "Hi. I was wondering if you'd want to come by for dinner. I was going to make that pasta you used to like." There was no mention of anything. No hint of obligation. No fishing for details about my work. Just a straightforward invitation. I said sure. She sounded surprised, but pleased. When I pulled into the driveway, it felt strange how little had changed. Same mailbox. Same crack in the concrete path. The front door stuck the way it always had, and I had to shoulder it a bit to get it open. The house smelled the same. Garlic, detergent, floor wax. There was a pot on the stove, something simmering. My mom was in the kitchen, humming a tune she probably didn't know she was humming. She turned when I came in and gave a quick smile. "You're early." Traffic was easy. We stood there for a second too long before she wiped her hands on a towel and gestured to the table. "I made salad too. And garlic bread. Thought I'd cover my bases." We sat. Talked. Mostly about neutral things, how my cousin's baby was teething, how the weather had been unpredictable lately, how she was thinking about retiring earlier than she planned. She asked if I was still in the same house. I said yes. She didn't ask what I'd been working on. Didn't bring up the check. Or the patent. Or the silence. Halfway through dinner, she asked if I was happy. I said I was. She nodded, didn't press. Just topped off my water glass and moved on to telling me about a new neighbor who let their dog bark all night. We talked about nothing for a while. But it was the kind of nothing that filled space gently, not the kind that scraped against the walls. After we finished eating, I helped with the dishes. She didn't protest like she used to. Just handed me a towel and said, "Old habits." We didn't say much while we worked. It was familiar. Functional. For a few minutes, it almost felt like the version of us that never quite existed, where things didn't need to be proved or defended. As I grabbed my coat, my dad walked in from the garage. He didn't look surprised to see me, but he paused in the doorway for a second before saying, "Hey." "Hey," I said back. He glanced at my coat. "You heading out?" "Yeah. Early morning tomorrow." He nodded. Then, after a pause, added, "Drive safe." It wasn't much. But it wasn't nothing. I said goodbye to my mom, stepped outside, and didn't look back until I was already in the car. That night, I didn't dissect the visit. I didn't wonder what it meant. I didn't search for hidden messages in the way she folded the napkins or how long he stood in the doorway. They hadn't apologized. And I hadn't expected them to. But they also hadn't asked for anything. That mattered more than I realized. There were a few more dinners after that. Spaced out. No pattern. Just a text now and then, asking if I was free. I never stayed long. I never stayed late. But I went. The conversations stayed light. I didn't volunteer much about work. They didn't push. My dad sometimes asked about the car or the lawn. My mom made the same 4 rotating meals, even when I told her not to go to the trouble. Once, she asked if I'd be willing to help set up a laptop she'd bought to stay connected. It was obvious she didn't know how to use it. I set it up, showed her how to video call, and left the instructions printed out on the fridge. She didn't ask for my help again, but she sent a test video call 2 days later. I answered. She said, "Just wanted to make sure I did it right." "You did." She smiled. "Okay, that's all." She hung up. There were moments, here and there, where I caught glimpses of softness. My dad showing up to replace the belt on my garage door without being asked. My mom leaving a small tin of cookies on my porch with a note that said, "Too much for just us." No signature. Just the gesture. None of it erased what came before. It didn't have to. I wasn't looking for repair. I was just letting things breathe. The door was open now, but only part way. That was enough. I didn't forget the years of silence. Or the things they said. Or the way they looked through me at that barbecue like I was background noise. That history didn't vanish just because they were trying now. But I also didn't want to carry it everywhere. There's a difference between remembering and reliving. I chose to remember. The boundary was still there. I kept it clear. No updates about the next licensing round. No discussions about the grants or where the tech was being deployed. If they brought it up, which was rare, I redirected. Not to be rude. Just to keep my space. They had learned how to be quiet around things they didn't understand. That alone was a shift. I didn't need them to be proud. I didn't need them to change everything. I just needed to know I could walk into that house and leave with my peace intact. And for the first time, that felt possible. It's been 3 years. I don't live in that little house anymore. I outgrew it, eventually. Not because I needed more space, but because I wanted to separate the chapter that got me here from the one I'm in now. The new place is quiet. Tucked back off a gravel road, no neighbors close enough to hear when I'm soldering at 2 a.m. or running voice prompts through early test rigs that will never leave the bench. I still tinker. Still write code in the margins of notepads. Old habits. The tech is in deployment now. I never made an announcement. There's no press release. No viral video of soldiers using it in the field. That's not how this kind of thing works. But I know where it is. I know the units that carry it. I've seen redacted briefings, test data, efficiency reports. Quiet lives saved, navigation in blackout zones, faster response in compromised terrain. It's enough. A few times, someone on a base overseas will reach out. They don't always know it was mine, they just want to say it helped. That the interface made things easier, smoother, safer. I read those messages when they come in, but I don't reply to most. Not because I don't care, but because those aren't about me. They're about something bigger, and that's the part I'm most proud of. My family doesn't really talk about the invention. Not directly. They've seen some of the numbers. Not the full picture, but enough to piece together that I'm not figuring things out anymore. I'm running something now. Not a company exactly, but a system. A framework that funds, supports, and seeds other women with ideas like mine. Girls who work in silence. Girls who are underestimated in their own homes, garages, classrooms. My mom tells people I work in defense. That's her shorthand. My dad says I do something with advanced gear. Neither of them says basement anymore. It's funny, respect came eventually. But it arrived after the part of me that needed it was already gone. They're proud now. You can hear it, even if they don't say it outright. They bring me up more often. They loop me into group texts again. Sometimes my mom will send a photo of something she found in the garage, asking if it's one of your old tools. The tone's different now. Gentle. Almost cautious. I keep my distance. Not out of anger. Just practicality. The door's still cracked, but I don't lean on it. Rebuilding takes energy. And mine's better spent elsewhere. I still work alone mostly. I have contractors when needed. Consultants. Lawyers. But I do the building myself. Always have. The work still pulls me in the same way it did when I was 14, kneeling on the garage floor with a wire strip and a fried circuit board. Time disappears. The house goes quiet. The world narrows to one very solvable problem at a time. There's something deeply satisfying in that. Not glamorous. Not loud. Just real. I don't miss the basement, but sometimes I think about it. The feel of the chair under me. The sound of the old lamp clicking on. The smell of burnt plastic when a circuit failed. I think about how many nights I sat there, surrounded by scraps no one believed would ever mean anything. Nights when the only thing keeping me going was the tiny, stubborn part of me that refused to be embarrassed by how much I cared. Back then, the story they told about me was fixed. Failed engineer. Basement dreamer. Deadbeat with a toolkit. They told it at barbecues, over beers, in that offhand way people talk when they think they know the ending. And maybe for a while, I thought they were right. But here's the thing no one tells you about narratives. They're editable. And the best way to change the story someone else wrote about you is to stop asking for a co-author. Rewrite it yourself. In permanent ink. These days, people assume success means visibility. Viral launches. Breaking news. Flashy branding and polished keynote speeches. But that's not how mine came. Mine came in silence. In a letter from a licensing firm. In a demo room with 3 engineers and no handshakes. In a check slid across a teller's counter while my father watched the number land like a brick. Success, for me, wasn't loud. It was a quiet room going still. A man who once called my work toys standing in the garage where I used to borrow tools, suddenly unsure what to say. It was a basement full of failures that added up to one thing that worked. And it was walking away, not with anger, not with revenge, but with peace. I don't tell this story to prove anything anymore. I tell it because I know someone out there is still in their version of that basement. Still hearing that they're wasting time. Still surrounded by people who laugh because they don't understand. If that's you, keep going. Not to spite them, but because your silence might hold more power than their noise ever will. You don't need a standing ovation. You just need a prototype that works. A contract with your name on it. And a check in your hand that makes the whole room pause. That's the part they can't erase. No matter how long they tried to pretend you'd never make it. Because when it's written in ink they never saw coming, they don't get to hold the pen. You do. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Told your dreams were pointless until they weren't? Let me know in the comments. What's something you kept building, even when no one believed in you? And if you've ever had to prove someone wrong just by staying the course, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the best response is results.